I've been messing around with the neural DSP Quad Cortex for a couple of weeks now, and it's given me some new perspectives on amp captures that I'd like to explore in this video. Before I get into the video, let me know where you stand on amp captures. Are you constantly downloading new ones? Are you happy with a few that you've downloaded? Or are you generally uninterested in the concept? The first point I want to discuss is that not all amp captures are created equal. Perhaps the most obvious factor is that the amps are going to be dialed in differently based on who's capturing them. Different people have different tastes, so you'll find that some people dial all of their captures in particularly bright, some particularly dark, some undergained, some overgained for instance. The physical models, or the amps themselves, will also differ in quite a few ways. The part tolerances in amps means that if you have two of the same amps side by side, dialed in visually to the same settings, for instance, everything at noon, the two will still sound different. Of course, there are also big differences between different product lines throughout the years. So for instance, a 1990 amp will sound different to a 2020 amp. Amps will get revised over the years for different tonal factors, as well as things like parts going out of manufacturing, or even stuff like cost saving. On the topic of age as well, there is also the condition of the physical amplifier itself. One amp on the absolute brink of death and another one fresh off the factory floor will likely sound completely different. Lastly, there is also the method of capturing the amplifiers. Now, most people on the Cortex Cloud, for instance, or on any available platform like this, will be using a load box with their amplifier. All load boxes sound completely different, as I found out recently when I was checking out the Reload 2 against the Sur-reactive load. There are also some people who are able to take high quality captures with the tapped output of the amplifier rather than using the load box. This means that the impedance matches that of the cabinet instead. Now with that, I have downloaded 4 different captures of a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier. These are all amp only captures, which means I can share an impulse response across all of them so you can hear just the differences in the amp head itself. The IR I'm using on this is the mega oversized cabinet from ML Sound Lab. Now 3 of these were free captures available on the Cortex Cloud, and one of them was the ML Sound Lab capture from the new Essentials Capture Pack. I do work for ML Sound Lab, so take what I say here with a grain of salt, but also understand that the point I'm getting across is that they all sound different. I really liked both the ML Mega and the Mesa Dual. I found that the Dual Fryer was a little bit too thick for me, and the Red CHV was a little bit undergained. One of the worst things about this is that there is no real consistency. You can't guarantee that you're going to like a capture just because you like the amplifier. It's a double-edged sword because that also goes for the stock models as well. If you happen to not like the stock model of the amplifier, you're pretty much out of luck, whereas with captures there are a wealth of them available to download. Now none of this really applies to pedal captures. One of the biggest things about pedal captures is that they don't really get better or worse with age. They either work or they don't. There's also less knobs on a pedal, so there's less subjectivity to dialing them in, and there's also far less part tolerances to consider. The method of capturing pedals is also completely different from amps. You run straight into the pedal pedal and then straight back out into the Quad Cortex, so it's a very straightforward process. This means that the differences in two different people's captures of a pedal can only really come from the actual pedal itself and the way they've dialed it in. Now there are going to be variances again throughout the years of these different pedals, but it does really depend on which pedal you choose. For something like the Boss SD1, these are going to be pretty similar throughout the years, but if you go for a big muff, it will be completely different depending on which year you go for. Now before we move on to the next section, I do just want to hear what these Recto tones sound like with a boost up front. I'm going to pick a capture of the Highwind Direwolf Overdrive for this. I'm mainly just curious to see how these take a boost. It's not particularly relevant to the video or really proving anything at all, but it sort of feels like something that I have to do when I'm checking out Recto tones. Again, I do find myself loving the ML and the Mesa captures here, but I also found that the Fryer started to come to life in this test. I'm still not a huge fan on the Red CHV, but then it may just be dialed in for a completely different tone to the sort of thing that I'm playing here. In case you're unaware, I've set up a Discord server with a bunch of content creator friends of mine, including Paul Bradshaw, the other John Brown, and Sonic Drive Studios. The link is in the description box down below. Feel free to come join and you can chat about all things guitars, bass, amps, pedals, and recording. One thing I've learned in my recent experiments with amp captures is that it's almost always better to make your own if possible. It takes out the randomness factor of just going through a big list trying to find something that you like. I've taken a couple of captures of my Victory Kraken Mark II, dialed in how I like it, running through the sur-reactive load. I've set up a preset here where I can compare my Kraken capture against the Victor Squid model in the Quad Cortex, and also a capture that I found myself quite liking that I downloaded online. Now I think that the downloaded capture actually does sound great, it's just maybe not super dialed into my tastes. It's quite a lot thicker, quite a lot more scooped in the mid-range, and obviously quite a lot darker. The stock model was pretty good, however it did have a little bit of honkiness in the mid-range that I haven't experienced with the real amp at all. My capture was maybe dialed in a little bit too bright for this sort of thing, but it was still my favourite of the three. I could also tweak this a little bit if I wanted to and dial back some of the brightness in post. So with shootouts like this, it's sort of shown that even in the case of something like the Axe effects, where you have pretty much every single amp you can think of, there is still value to be added by making your own capture of those amps that are already included. My biggest gripe with captures though is that you can't really dial them in too much after you've already captured them. Most of these platforms do have a really good EQ and input gain mechanic in them, so that you can dial them in a little bit after the fact. However, it's always better to get them right at the source first. I took a second capture of the Victory Kraken at a lower gain setting, and then I tried to match it with both the stock amp model as well as the original capture that I took, just tweaked back a bit. To match the original capture to the lower gain capture, I actually had to pull the gain back by almost 18 decibels. Let's hear these again back to back and then we'll talk about it some more. Now the feel of the tweaked capture is probably the weirdest one to try and explain because it just feels so strange underneath the hand, but I'm not sure how well that comes across on camera. It sort of feels like it was really choked off and lacking any sort of natural compression, despite hitting a similar sort of gain range. I would say that the Victor Squid dialed in was a lot closer to the new capture than the original capture dialed back sounded. It still wasn't perfect, don't get me wrong. I don't think the Victor Squid model was able to get quite as full sounding as the capture. That might just be that they modeled the Mark I of the amplifier and I'm running the Mark II though. Either way though, that's really why I tend to stay away from downloading amp captures in the first place. If you're not already in the ballpark to start with, then the capture needs to be pretty much scrapped off. You really don't get that much room to manipulate things before things start to sound weird, unlike with the amp models where you can really dial in things exactly how you want them. Now I would say that the main benefit to amp captures is that you can sort of patch in anything that isn't already on the unit. I can just hop onto the Cortex cloud and download pretty much any amp I can think of. The stock amp models in these modelers are typically going to be a culmination of the most popularly requested amps, as well as some personal favourites from the team. You can always expect to see a Mesa Mark, a dual rectifier, a JCM 800, a Plexi, a Fender Twin. All those sorts of staple amplifiers are almost always covered in the default amps on these modelers. Amps like the Highwind Torrent though are maybe too niche to be found on the units themselves, but you can find them online quite easily through captures. I'll quickly demo Draven Noir's capture of the Highwind Torrent, but first I'm going to need to switch out to something a lot lower tuned. This is the Balaguer Mich 6 Espada, a 28.5 inch scale length baritone currently tuned down to drop F sharp. Another niche capture I've really been enjoying recently is the Matamp GT120, which was captured by Fuzzed Drones. This one works especially well with some wet effects, so I've got the tape delay and the Hall reverb. I could keep going with third-party captures all day, but in the sake of keeping the video length down, I'm going to cut it there. I'll also leave links in the description box down below to both Fuzzed Drones and to Draven Noir's channels if you'd like to support what they do. Let's now try and wrap things up into a conclusion of sorts. If you're not someone who suffers with the weight of option paralysis, then amp captures are going to be absolutely awesome for your workflow. I've been downloading a bunch of them since getting the Quad Cortex, and it's been great just to experiment with different pedals, different amplifiers, and different combinations thereof. The actual quality of amp capturing these days is pretty much bang on, to the point that it doesn't really matter what platform you use. Whether it's Neural Amp Modeler, Tonex, or Quad Cortex, they're all going to hit the mark. Doing the comparisons between the Victor Squid amp model in the Quad Cortex and my Victory Kraken Mark II really showed me the power of having captures alongside amp models. If you find yourself liking one of these stock amp models, it's almost a guarantee that you'll be able to find a capture of that amp that you like even more. The downsides to amp capturing quickly becomes apparent after you've downloaded a lot of them. There's only so much that you can do to tweak them, and once you've filled up your model with amps that are all named stuff like BH amp, B1, M3, T7, it becomes really difficult to navigate them. I am still sort of skeptical about the world of amp capturing, and I do personally prefer amp modeling. However, making this video has given me a new perspective on the matter. The most important thing is that there is definitely fun to be had. Also, a little tip before I go, find authors that you like. If you like the way their rig is set up for capturing, and you like the way they dial in amplifiers, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to enjoy other things on their profile. So thank you for checking out this video. This wasn't a sponsored video or anything, just wanted to have a fun chill session checking out some captures in the Quad Cortex. I do have a Toman affiliate link in the description box down below, so if you did want to pick anything up, I would greatly appreciate it if you would use my link. It gives me a nice little bit of kickback without costing you a thing. Also, while you were down there, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss my future uploads. Until next time, I've been Kai.